Good morning. Let us start our remote virtual conference, the material body of the book between tradition and innovation. And it is a paradox that on this beautiful morning and on this day, the 7th of May, which is devoted to the books and regaining of Lithuanian press, we are starting our conference. I'm Jolita Leškevičienė, one of the organizers of this conference, and I'm very happy to say that we could devote this conference to the topic of books. Life presented new challenges. You can see that our conference is a remote one, but we hope that it will nevertheless be very interesting. And let me first invite the director of the Art Research Institute of Vilnius Academy of Art, Dalia Klaimienė, to say a few introductory words. Good morning. I would like to welcome you at this conference, remote conference, the material body of the book between tradition and innovation. On behalf of the organizer of the conference, Vilnius Art Academy and the Art Research Institute, let me welcome you all, those who are participating with their presentations and those who are listening. The conference was designed and preparation started a year ago when we were still living our usual lives, and we were hoping that by inviting all of you book art experts, book history experts to Vilnius, we will gather in one room and discuss this relevant and interesting topic. However, our lives have changed a few months ago, and in the world that is being attacked by this callous virus, we had to stop some of our plans or postpone them until indefinite time. The conference was planned for the 7th and 8th of May, and the fact that we're joining this conference on these days is a sign that our desire to share our scientific research and art ideas is stronger than any circumstances. I'm really grateful to all the speakers who did not refuse to participate in this new form of conference. I'm especially grateful to the organizers of the conference, researchers Jolita Leškevičienė and Ieva Pleikienė from the Art Research Institute, who managed to make sure that we will be able to hear 19 presentations over these 2 days, and they will be given by researchers and artists from Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Germany, Italy, and the UK. I would also like to thank our professional engineers from the company Conferenta, who have done a lot already and who will be helping conference participants over the next 2 days if they face any technical challenges. However, we hope to avoid those challenges or to reduce them to a minimum. This form of a conference, when we are joining it from our homes, is not usual for conference organizers and many participants, but today this is the safest way to communicate. So we have managed to overcome the closed state borders and different time zones, and we'll be able to enjoy ourselves by analyzing what the material body of a book consists of, and trying to look at the fashions of book decoration and changes in those fashions. At the end of my short introduction, I would like to sincerely congratulate the staff of the oldest Lithuanian university library, that is Vilnius University Library, which is celebrating its 450th anniversary this year. This library is proud to be safeguarding over 5 million documents and unique books, and we're dedicating this conference to all of you. So I would like to wish you all good and meaningful time, and I wish you interesting presentations and discussions that will open up our horizons. Thank you very much, and I sincerely hope that next time we'll be able to meet in person.
So, right, our first session is dedicated to partners of this conference, which is the Vilnius University Library. As it has been mentioned, Vilnius University Library is celebrating 450 years anniversary of its activity. And on this occasion, may I invite Director of the Vilnius University Library, Irena Krivienė, to say some opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, organizers and participants of this conference, we are celebrating 450 years anniversary. And on this occasion, I would like to welcome all the participants of the conference, which is called the Material Body of the Book, Between Tradition and Innovation. I wish to express exceptional gratefulness to Jolita Liškevičienė and Ieva Pleikienė, who contributed the most to organizing of this event. And we are very proud and honor, and it is a great honor for us to be part of the event that is organized as part of the celebrations of our 450 years anniversary. This is a good opportunity to share some ideas, and also we have organized as part of this conference an exhibition which displays some valuable items of the Vilnius University Library. And there will be more events planned to celebrate the 450 years anniversary of our library. Yet life had other arrangements for us, and we had to change our plans. But our wish to hold a conference has not changed, and it hasn't changed our wish to arrange an exhibition at our library. And may I draw your attention to some links between the university library and the Vilnius University. In 1908, we opened an engraving department at our university, and then there were other departments who were opened in 1940 and later, dealing with all kinds of arts, including bookbinding and graphics. We have a great collection of graphical works and other works dating back to the beginning of the 20th century. We're very proud that we get a lot of visitors, and among them, majority are representatives of the Vilnius University community. And may I now make a short introduction of the exhibition about the Book of Art, which features two themes, decorative elements and also the traces left by the owners of these books. The documents that we display in the exhibition reflect the rich funds of our library. And the items that we store in our archives, in our vaults, range from the most rare books up to the contemporary valuable printed books. We have a lot of examples of the excellent work by engravers and bookbinders. In 1957, a book with portraits was published where a light and darkness technique were used. And this book is really one of the most prominent exhibits in this exhibition. There are other outstanding pieces of book making displayed in our exhibition, including 16 manuscripts. Most of them are illustrated by the students of the Jesuit Academy, and their works, their illustrations are really excellent pieces of art. I would like to invite you to visit this exhibition by following a link which is presented at the Vilnius University Library. And physically, all this exhibition is held at the White Hall of the Vilnius University. Once again, may I thank Jolita Liškevičienė and Ieva Pleikienė, organizers of this conference, and I wish fruitful discussions to all of you.
So this is the time for us to start the main part of our conference. I will introduce the first session of the conference, which is devoted to old book collections and book artists in Lithuania. Well, the works and books held at Vilnius University Library are very important to us because Vilnius University Library has always been a depository of knowledge which was accessible to many people, and actually it created the field of culture of the entire Lithuania. So during this first session of the conference, which is devoted to old books, we'll be able to see what were the roots of the books and how those traditions are reflected in today's books. A few technical details. Well, at the bottom of the screen you see a link to the virtual exhibition at Vilnius University Library. You can also ask questions to the speakers, and we'll be able to see those questions during the part devoted to discussions, and we'll be able to hear replies to those questions. I will now invite our first speaker, Sondra Rankelienė from Vilnius University Library. The topic of her presentation is reflections of different periods in the incunabula of Vilnius University Library, covers provenance, marginalia, and graffiti. Sonia Rankelienė is an employee of the rare books department of Vilnius University Library. She graduated from Vilnius University, and her research area is related to the 15th to 18th century publications and cartography, the analysis of provenance and book covers, the arrangement of exhibitions of thematic annotated early documents, the compilation of early catalogs and bibliographic indexes, and the publication of articles on printed heritage. Dear participants of the conference, the topic of my presentation is the reflections of different periods in the incunabula of Vilnius University Library. The library has the largest collection of incunabula in Lithuania. All those collections have been uploaded onto the online catalog, and each entry contains a description of the cover of every incunabulum, defects, manuscript notes, and other reading signs. So the electronic catalog contains all the data about the differences of or special features of every incunabulum compared to other copies of the same book. And currently Our incunabula at our library are being digitalized, and 33 of them have been uploaded to Vilnius University digital collections. Vilnius University Library in 2017 started cooperating with the Consortium of European Research Libraries and the developers of the May database. And this database means a new approach to the oldest books, because books are now viewed not only as the carriers of the textual content, but also as a historic and unique property. Lithuanian incunabula came to our country from remote locations of production. Therefore, they were very expensive, and they were safeguarded and handed over from generation to generation. I'm going to focus on different features of incunabula that can be seen on the covers. I will be speaking about initials, I will be speaking about provenances, proto-ex libris, the pointing hands, and the difference in drawing pointing hands, etc. I would like to mention that the approximate dates of all the elements that I mentioned are determined according to the years of life of the owners of books or annotators. And often the covers of these oldest books contain details from the 15th to 19th century. And these details are used to decorate book covers, to repair them, or to adapt them to the needs of the owner. And we can see some old clasps, corners, or other details. Sometimes incunabula were rebound in the 18th or 19th and 20th centuries in order to keep up with the traditions of book binding of a particular period. But even if we know the year of production of the clasps or corners of a book, we can't be sure that the book was bound in that year. For example, here we can see the clasps with an ornament of a man's head. In the eyelet, it was produced in 1489, and we believe that this book was rebound in the 18th century using a typical brown leather cover, but the clasps were transferred from an older book. Here you can see the corners in the form of a kite. They are adorned with ornaments of lilies and a monogram of Mary. The book is bound with clasps dating from 15th to 16th century. We also see the central brass plate, which is not in harmony with the clasps or the corners of the book. And this plate was produced in 1470 or between 1470 and 1530. This is a book that contains a window with the book title, which was transferred from the original cover of the book. This is a brass frame produced in the 15th century in the Netherlands or Flanders, and the spine of the book is adorned with golden threads. The edges of the book are colored in red, and fly leaves are made of blue paper. Sometimes when the covers of incunabula became worn, the covers of other books were used to rebound them. And for example, you can see the cover that was repaired in the 18th century. This was the original monastery book cover, and the spine of the book is rebound rebound with brown leather. Sometimes completely new covers were used to rebound books. In the 16th to 17th century, books were rebound not following any fashions or in order to decorate them, but for practical reasons, in order to replace the worn leather or parchment with a new durable cover of a book. And in this slide you can see the typical decorative elements of book covers. In the 19th century, scientists, researchers, and personal library owners tended to rebound books with similar or identical covers. The first picture is the Incunabulum, which was rebound in the 19th century. It belonged to the classical philology professor Jürgen Anton Niese, and this book was rebound with a simple cardboard cover, which was covered with blue marble paper. And this was a trend at the beginning of the 20th century at Vilnius Magnus University Library. But the cardboard cover would be usually additionally covered with pseudo marble paper. Another trend in the mid-20th century was covering hardback covers with polish, and it was believed that this was a very good protection for a book. Vilnius University Library bookbinders and restorers suggested a modern way to bind books without whose covers were lost. So they were suggested using a simple cardboard cover which could be easily replaced. Well, the edges of the book give us a lot of information about book history. For example, in newly rebound books, the edges are the only element that preserve some of the information about the previous historic book cover. The edges were usually colored, and this was a trend in the 18th century. The last picture shows the edges that were painted in blue in the 18th century, and the blue color was usually used when the book was bound with white pig leather or was bound using light parchment. A few words about initials. Initials came to printed books from manuscripts, and they are one of the most beautiful decorative elements. We can find a lot of Lombards in blue or red ink. Later owners would place their initials made in simple ink. We have also noticed that the more decorative and luxurious initials are, the simpler the cover is, and most often these books with simple covers were rebound at the beginning of the 20th century. This slide shows several initials painted in the 15th century, at the end of the 15th century, at the beginning of the 16th century. So you can see some simple lines and some ornaments and several colors and golden plates. Sometimes we find initials that were additionally adorned by subsequent owners of the book. In this slide you can see red and blue Lombards from the beginning of the 16th century, which were later adorned by an 18th century Baroque artist. Lombards from the Lombardy region, made in red and blue ink, are one of the earliest drawn initials. Here you can see similar initials, Lombards from the 15th century, which were later adorned by an unknown artist by drawing simple faces in the middle of them. In empty spaces, the subsequent owners liked to add some letters. They usually used red or black or brown ink. And in the 18th century, they used simple letters, which were easier to read. Well, the specific feature of Lithuanian incunabula is that we find a lot of different provenances in one book, in a single book. The owners, in trying to protect their valuable property, such as books, marked books with their ownership signs. And first, they used proto-ex libris and other signs. Later on, property signs or provenances became simpler. One of the most decorative provenances that we managed to find at Vilnius University Library are proto-ex libris. Here you can see hand-drawn symbols. One of them was found in the religious law compilation, which was written by the Italian canon law pioneer Graciano in 1493. So you can see a hand-drawn proto-ex libris with a coat of arms. It most probably belonged to the 17th century resident. It is, you can see a colorful and gilded coat of arms, which is vertically divided into two parts. And you can also see the motto in French, Espérance me confort. Although we were not able to identify the owner of this book, we can draw a conclusion that the original cover was really decorative, and we think that the owner was probably from England or Scotland. We also found another proto-ex libris in the book of 1485. This is the coat of arms with blue background and 6 green mountains. Another example, a simple proto-ex libris drawn in Browning. This probably dates to the end of the 16th century, the beginning of the 17th century. This is a coat of arms with a symbol, and we also see pointing hands. When it comes to manuscript notes, I must say that they include a very broad range of notes. For example, handwritten notes, and the text there differs depending on the period. So we can also see pointing hands, numbering, certain dates indicating the age of the book, and underlining important parts of the text, and other signs left by the owner. And take into account the specificities of those signs, we can identify the date on when they were made in the book. For example, we can see certain signs that were secret signs, and you can see this comment or sign when you put 2 pages of the book together. And now a few words about pointing hands. You can see various pointing hands found in incunabula held at Vilnius University Library. One of the earliest pointing hands was drawn in red ink. It was probably made when the text was numbered, and you can also see several pointing hands with laces. They date back to the 17th century. With time, they became more rough, and people started drawing those hands without being worried that they would disfigure the book. The most important thing was to find the relevant part of the text in the book. And later on, pointing hands were replaced by the inscription Nota Bene. Another special sign is, or decoration element is drawings or graffiti. Some unprofessional artists wanted simply to decorate the pages of books. Some owners wanted to illustrate the content of the book, but the most often found drawings are usually difficult to explain because they are not related to decoration of books or to the content. There are some unclear ornaments, cityscapes or plants, and for example, here you can see several animals or other objects. So when we analyze and appreciate the decorative details of incunabula, we can see that there were different trends of book decoration or book adaptation during different periods of time. And if we manage to identify the period to which one or another element, book decoration element belonged to, we can identify the period during which the book owners lived. And we can find many decorative elements from the 15th and 16th century that were transferred to newer covers. We can also see the oldest traditions of book safekeeping and repair. For example, at the 18th century, the original book covers were often replaced simply by wanting to make them more beautiful. And at the beginning, owners would make some intricate initials in different colors. Later on, they were replaced by simple letters. Pointing hands in the 15th, 16th century were really beautiful and elegant. Later on, they became rough, ugly, and later replaced by the reference Nota Bene. And depending on the fashions that prevailed at different times, the comments, drawings, and the materials used changed. For example, gilded or simple ink proto-ex libris and provenances in the 16th century were later on replaced by coats of arms or supra-libros consisting only of initials and dates. And you can see that provenances have remained popular, although they changed over time.
Thank you, Sandra, for a very interesting presentation. And I can see that you already have questions, so keep them for now. And now, may I invite the second speaker of this session, Ina Kožūra, from Vilnius University Library. And the topic of her presentation is story behind one engraving, the artistic expression of the 18th century books. Ina works in the rare books department of Vilnius University, and her fields of interest include books or history of books in the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Commonwealth of Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So the floor is yours. Welcome. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for this opportunity to make my presentation. Starting from the middle of the 20th century, there were different publications issued about the history of Vilnius University, and they often contained an engraving dating back to 1781. The engraving depicts the coat of arms of the Vilnius University, surrounded by several buildings. At the top of the engraving, there is an abbreviation of the name conferred upon Vilnius University by the Educational Commission of the time, the Principal School of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, in Latin. Reproductions of the engraving can often be found in the catalogs of exhibitions held at the Vilnius University Library, monographs on the history of the university, student diplomas, and postcards. In the 21st century, interpretation of the engraving was broadened to symbolize not only the university, the higher education institution, but the entire state as well. And the Lithuanian Institute of History uses it as an emblem to one of its publications. The 1781 engraving is exceptional as it is the earliest graphic depiction of the University of Vilnius. By its artistic origin, it is different from other university plans and schemes that were drawn in the 16th and 17th century, and which were mainly made for practical purposes. There is also a drawing by Pranciškus Smuglevičius that also reflects university buildings, but it was created later, about 1785. Another exceptional characteristic of the engraving is the Latin abbreviation on the drawings of the buildings. For the peers of the artists, these abbreviations were meaningful and clearly understood. Yet the contemporary viewer, however, needs additional information about the historical context. Perhaps the latter circumstance is one of the reasons why the engraving has not been studied thoroughly until now. Therefore, in my presentation, I shall try to make a thorough analysis of circumstances surrounding the creation of the engraving in the context of the reforms carried out at the university in the 18th century. The relevance of such analysis is first and foremost determined by the rarity of artistic images of Vilnius University, and moreover, it also reveals the attitude towards the role of the Education Committee in reforming the university. In order to understand the meaning of the engraving, we first of all need to analyze historical circumstances of its drawing. After abolition of the Jesuit order, the management of the university was handed over to the Educational Commission, which had to create a new concept of the higher education school and to implement the Krakow and Vilnius University reform. The new concept, the drawing up of the new concept took about 10 years, and the situation started changing in 1780 when Martynas Počobutas becomes the rector. He manages to partially change the organizational structure of the university before the fall of 1971 and prepare it for the new academic year. To attract public interest, Počobutas decides to link the opening of the new academic year with the name Dame of the King. He instructs Dovydas Pilchovskis, the prefect of the printing house, to print lecture prospectuses in Latin. A solemn meeting was held on November 24th, during which a new name was conferred upon the University of Vilnius, the principal school of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. After the meeting, or after the speeches of Počobutas and other honorable guests, the new lecture prospectuses were distributed to all those present, and then the rector ordered to reissue the prospectuses. And it is in those two issues of the prospectuses that the engraving depicting the University of Vilnius was used. The purpose of the prospectuses was to represent the authority of Vilnius University in public. And of course, it determined the choice of the format, type, and ornaments. The second issue of the prospectus contained certain changes that were made to the text, and also the rector's inaugural speech was added to the text. And the text was printed not only in Latin but also in Polish languages. The engraving was printed at the beginning or before the beginning of the rector's speech and before the beginning of the description of lectures. So it was used not only as an illustration but also as an ornament of the beginning of a text. Thus, the engraving was created during the first year Počobutas took over management of the university, when the reform was only started. Therefore, the university's organizational structure was still incomplete. And it has, and these circumstances also influenced the contents of the engraving. And now we shall analyze the three parts of the engraving, the three groups, thematic groups, the coat of arms, the university buildings, and the cityscape. The university coat of arms occupies a central piece in the engraving. In the center or in the middle of the coat of arms is Vytis, representing the Lithuanian Grand Duchy. And after abolition of the Jesuit order, the Jesuit monogram IHS is replaced by the King Stanislav August monogram SAR. And the second group of the images consists of the buildings. And first of all, we will start analyzing the buildings from the left corner of the lower part of the engraving. First of all, we see the building with the inscription Collegium Physicum. The College of Physics was a centerpiece of the Reformed University, and therefore the Educational Commission instructed the College of Physics to be located in the building facing the facade of St. John's Church. And to name the building after the English philosopher Bacon, whose ideas were very popular during the Enlightenment. From the prospectuses, we can see that only two departments started their activity in the College of Physics in 1781. It is the Applied Mathematics and Experimental Physics department. Now, next to the College of Physics, we can see a three-story building with the inscription SEM, Cand, which is deciphered as Seminarium Candidatorum. During the second half of the 18th century, candidates were the students of the teachers' seminary. And the Education Commission of the time wanted to set up a teachers' seminary at the university. But this idea was opposed by the local nobility, and the attempts failed. And in the engraving, we can see a building which that was supposed to house a department of the university that never came to existence. And then on the right side, there is a three-layer building with the inscription Skol Palat, which means Schola Palatina. This department or this building was to house the high-ranking officers' school. In 1773, a cadet school was set up in Grodno. However, due to financial difficulties, it was closed before 1780. King Stanislav August and Educational Commission agreed that the Grodno cadet school had to be transferred to Vilnius. And the rector, Počobutas, hoped that the future students of the cadet school will help to solve the problem of the shortage of students at Vilnius University in the whole. And Perhaps these plans were known to the author of the engraving, as it included the cadet school in the depiction of the university in the engraving. Architectural research suggests that Vilnius Cadet School also operated on Pilies Street, building number 11. However, and it was a two-story building. However, in the engraving, we can see a three-story cadet school, and this discrepancy can be easily explained. Apparently, in 1780-1781, it was still not clear where the cadet school will be situated. And on the other hand, it is quite likely that the author depicted the three-story building in order to emphasize integrity of all university buildings. Another building in the engraving is Collegium Medicum. And the situation of the medical college was much better compared to other departments of the university. First of all, the college managed to attract quite sufficient number of students to be operating for its successful operation. And on the other hand, the medical college had 4 foreign teachers, including Stefano Bisio, Michael Reiner, Jacob Riot, and Jean Gilbert. And medical college had been handed over several buildings on Pilies Street, but the engraving depicts only one three-story building. And evidence of the successful medical college activity is further reinforced by the projects carried out by Professor Jean Gilbert, who started a garden of herbs in one of the courtyards of the college. And this, in fact, became the start of the botanical garden, another department of the Reformed University. Now, there is only one-story building in the engraving next to the medical college with the inscription Colon Pop. This inscription is understood or explained as Colonia Pauperum, basically a school for the poor. Well, after 1773, when all convicts of Jesuit order in Vilnius were handed over to Educational Commission, it turned out that the Vilnius convicts had no place to be housed. And therefore, the Vilnius convict was scattered in different places around the city. And as a result, and we can guess that, and this Colonia Pauperum was set up for the poor students of the city. So we can conclude that the lower part of the engraving consists of 2 colleges, cadet school, teachers' seminary, botanical garden, and a colony for the poor students. And now there are several objects in the upper part of the university. And first and foremost, it is a building or a tower with the inscription Reserach, which is decoded as Observatorium Regium, the Royal Observatory. And this is perhaps the most precious project of Rector Pochabutas and the pride of the university in general. The observatory was built in 1766, and the title Royal was conferred upon the observatory for its scientific research and works, which enabled to determine the longitude and the latitude of the city of Vilnius. Another Another tower, which you can see in the engraving, is the bell tower of St. John's Church. And the bell tower is part and parcel of all other architectural objects of the university complex, although it does not belong to the scientific or academic functions. And yet we cannot see the church itself. And finally, the third group of the objects depicted in the engraving is the cityscape objects. On the left from the University Observatory, you can see a dome, a tower, and a pediment of a church. And indeed, in this 18th century, Vilnius had quite a few churches decorated with domes. And it is for this reason that and one of them was the dome of the St. Casimir's Chapel, which is located at the cathedral. And in the top right corner of the engraving, you can see hills with the ruins of the upper castle of the Grand Dukes and 3 crosses, which were built in the 14th century to commemorate Franciscan martyrs. To summarize, the publication that contained the engraving was commissioned by Martynas Počobutas, the rector of the university at the time. And then the university printing house was run by David Pilchovsky, a doctor of theology and translator of Latin literature. Yet the author of the engraving is not known. The engraving was published in 2 issues of the lecture prospectuses in 1781. In 1782, prospects were no longer printed because of the difficult financial situation of the university. Their printing was resumed only in 1783 and lasted until 1832. Yet I have to note that since 1783, the engraving no longer appears in the official publications of the university. We couldn't find the prints of the engraving in other publications from Vilnius academic printing house. The engraving contains has not only illustrative but also decorative features. It has to be noted that in the 18th century, engravers usually put their initials in the portraits, illustrations, but not in the decorative elements such as flaps, vignettes, or other. Thus, in 1781, the 1781 engraving depicts a representative landscape which contains both real and invented or created objects. The artist was tasked with connecting the buildings from different parts of the city, which were also a part of the new structure of the university. In 1783, the final phase of the university reform was implemented, during which the medical college was merged with the College of Physics by setting up a college of moral sciences, and it is not depicted in the engraving. Therefore, all the changes that took place in 1783 and all the subsequent structural changes serve as a reason, explain the reason why the engraving was no longer used after 1783. Yet, the life of this engraving continued even after 1781. It has a symbolic content which and contains the symbols which are still important for Lithuania: the cathedral, the castle, the 3 hills, the Hill of Three Crosses. And the rarity of this engraving is a very good ground to maintain it as a part of the heritage objects. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina, for this excellent presentation. You can see that one picture, one engraving can tell the whole story of Vilnius University. Now we'll move to a different period of time. We'll be talking about book covers, and I would like to invite Agnė Zemkajūtė from Wróblewski Library at the Lithuanian Academy of Sciences. She will give a presentation called Dressed in Silk, the use of fabric in the bindings of the old books held in the Wróblewski Library at the Lithuanian Academy of Sciences. Agnė Zemkajūtė is a bibliographer at the Rare Publications Division, and her main areas of research include the Christian publications from the 16th to the 18th century, publications that belong to the institutions of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, Lithuanian Incunabula. She has arranged a number of exhibitions at the Wróblewski Library and the Lithuanian National Library. Agne, the floor is yours. Hello. Let me first of all express my happiness that this conference is taking place, although its form is not usual to us. I have an opportunity to present to you the publications held at the Rare Publications Division at the Wróblewski Library. These are books dressed in fabric. Sometimes it was done for practical reasons, sometimes for aesthetic ones. Well, the information about textile book bindings in Lithuania and in the world is quite scarce, especially when it comes to printed books. One of the reasons is that the most frequent fabric that was used to bound books was leather. Only the most decorative books were dressed in silk, but they were additionally fortified with metal or another method to make sure that they do not succumb to tear and wear. In the 16th century, the use of fabric was further reduced by leather imported from Morocco to Europe, which became popular and which could be easily decorated with different ornaments. Another reason is that the literature often describes the same books. They are dressed in velvet, jacquard, and other more ornamental silk. They are decorated with silk or metal threads set in pearls, precious and semi-precious stones. They also have paintings on parchment. Well, these exceptionally beautiful books are admired by everyone. They draw attention, and the simpler ones are overshadowed by them and forgotten. But fabric was not completely forgotten, and although I can't show you especially luxurious textile bindings, the books that are held in the Rare Publications department are no less interesting, and they should be brought to daylight. I will not be speaking about two textile uses in this presentation. First, I will not be speaking about capitals because the majority of them are very simple, and they only carry out a practical function, and they could be a subject of a separate research. Another method that I will not be discussing today is the gluing of cloth on book spines and corners to protect the sections of the books that are most prone to tear and wear. And such book covers were usually covered with colorful or monochrome paper, and I will now mainly focus on the more decorative books. We at our department have two books from the 17th century with paper hard covers which are additionally dressed in fabric. One of those books is Koronos Lota, printed in 1673 at Vilnius Basilian Printing House. The library has several copies of this book. One of the copies is very simple and bound with leather, another is not bound at all, and the third copy that you see in this picture is covered with green shantung silk. We don't know who the owner of that book was, and we don't know why this cover was chosen. The more decorative copy is the second one, that is the copy printed in Vienna in 1700, but we have no more precise information about the binding of the book. We know that the owner of the book is Konstantinas Jablonskis. He probably bought that book because of its content and not for aesthetic reasons. Well, and we only have some single one-off copies at our rare publications department. We can assume that fewer books dressed in fabric were preserved compared to leather ones because of the wars and other calamities. Such books were less durable, they succumbed to tear and wear more quickly, and they were lost. The first two books are of secular nature, but we can find many more examples of using fabric in Christian liturgical books that belonged both to Eastern and Western Christians. To make things more simple, I will call Western Christians Catholics from further on, although if we take into account units, in Lithuania, when it comes to Catholic and Orthodox books, we need to be more precise because some of the books are Catholic, although they are not written in the Latin alphabet. And silk or silk velvet was used to dress Catholic missals and Orthodox gospel books or service books. And we can see certain connections here because books were decorated in a very similar manner. Well, I'm talking about books used in liturgy for the worship of God. Therefore, they should be more decorative as an expression of respect. But unfortunately, I have to start with what was lost. You can see two books here, and some of the elements were lost, and you can see some lighter spots where the previous elements were. You can also have a look at the manuscript Nobel service book. You can see a metal plate in the center and the images of four evangelists in the corner. You can see that the evangelists were depicted on square metal plates, and the possible crucifixion scene in the oval, which was surrounded by rays. And the clasp was also lost. We believe that a crucifixion scene was on the book because we find similar decorations on other books kept at our library. Some Catholic missals also have especially decorative covers. Similarly to the previously shown service book, you can see that these books are also covered with velvet, and the edges and the center is decorated with some metal details. Not all missals have provenances or donation inscriptions, so it is not always clear who they belong to, but they are mostly related to cathedrals, to bishops, or they have been donated by rich founders. Well, this book was donated to Kražiai Benedictine Church in 1647 by Samogitian bishop, who later became Vilnius bishop, Jurgis Tiškevičius. And the metal decorative details do not only have a decorative function. They serve as a reinforcement of the book, and the corner details make sure that the velvet does not rub against the surface of the altar or another surface when the book is opened. You can also find similar missals exhibited at the Church Heritage Museum, at the Lithuanian National Library, and probably elsewhere. Well, such missal books decorated with metal and velvet are not very frequent. Missals are usually bound in a simple manner and usually using leather. But almost all missals contain small bookmarks made of bound fabric, and they are attached to each page of prayer, Eucharistical prayer. This should be a facilitation for the priest when he had to turn the pages. Most often these bookmarks were made of different silk ribbons, and these strips are not a special decoration or an invention by some priests. They were used in almost all missals, and even if they were lost, you could see with your bare eye the traces of glue, which shows that the strip, the bands, was simply lost. More decorative bookmarks are used to mark separate missal places, pages. The bookmarks were usually made of silk ribbons. They were sometimes attached to a capital, although this was quite rare. We can guess that the ribbons were moved constantly, so they would tear, and it was easier to simply place them on the pages between separate pages. The decorative element of these bookmarks were the small pillows that held the ribbon. The first pillows were of two types, square or rectangular. And in the picture you can see that ribbons were usually attached to the pillow and the strips below the pillow. Sometimes they were simply tied into a knot. I'm not showing you the knots where the pillows were lost, although this strip of fabric shows that the pillow was there. In addition to rectangular pillows, there are also, in addition to square pillows, there are rectangular ones. They are also decorated with various pleated threads. We can find and see similar pillows at the Church Heritage Museum and the Lithuanian National Library. Well, it is a paradox, but we can thank nationalization for the fact that many decorative details of missals were collected in one place. And it was thanks to nationalization that missals were collected from different churches into several places, and we can see them exhibited. But of course, some of missals were lost due to the same nationalization. When we tried to look for similar pillows abroad, we faced a problem because not many similar books are exhibited or publicly available. And as far as I could see, in Western Europe, we usually used pillows in the form of a narrow tube. And I haven't been able to find anything similar to square pillows. The picture on the right shows a missal created in the style of Vienna Jugendstil with such a pillow. And we can see similar examples in elsewhere in Western Europe, but it is important to know that these liturgical books are usually held in non-secular libraries, but in churches, in cathedrals, or monasteries. However, my research directed me towards Eastern traditions. In Russia, you can still find bookmarks in the form of a coin, and you can see pictures from the internet. One of them is a new one. It is an example of a modern coin used as a bookmark, and they are round ones, but as far as I know, square and rectangular ones were also produced, and we believe that this was the influence of the Lithuanian Grand Duchy. And we also compared the technique of attaching golden threads. In Lithuania, in liturgical clothes, golden threads were attached in the same way as in Orthodox clothes. Western Europe used a different technique to attach golden threads. So I believe that we did not only use the same technique as Eastern countries, but we also took over some decorative elements. The majority of books bound in fabric, at least in our library, are church calendars or rubrics, and the majority of them are from Samogisha. Here you can see several calendars. The second one stands out because it uses golden thread. And the Samogishan Archbishopry has a lot of examples like that. In the future, once the quarantine is over, it would be useful to check the archives of other libraries, but I believe that we can speak about the mass binding of calendars with fabric, and we could also guess that some priests preferred books bound in fabric. That's why we have such a collection. However, a large part of rubrics held at Wróblewski Library shows that one copy out of the copies that belonged to one priest, some were bound with fabric, some had paper covers. And at the beginning, monochrome or patterned fabric was used, and from the mid-19th century, velvet covers became more popular. They were additionally adorned with some ornaments, crosses, crucifixions, scenes, bishops' coats of arms, etc. Although at the beginning of my presentation I said that I will only focus on printed books, I would like to finish by showing you one manuscript, which shows a very interesting use of silk and printing. So this is the liturgical hymn book Irmonologion, found from the 17th century. It was made at Basilian Monastery of Suprașul, and it is decorated with colorful decorations. Some of them are made of paper, but we can also see the texture of fabric in certain spots, and we can see the use of silk, which reminds us of application or stained glass. And this hymn book, which combines both manuscript printing techniques and silk, finishes my presentation. I could speak more and discuss other manuscripts, but when we speak about printed books with textile bindings, we could start looking for other copies in other libraries. And I believe that it would be useful to start from service books that were especially decorative and rubrics or calendars who were often bound in fabric. And their comparison could allow us to speak more about the use of textile bindings and the changing fashions in Lithuania. Thank you.
Thank you, Agne, for an excellent presentation and for actually broadening the context on this topic. Well, now, according to the program, we have questions and answers time. And for this, I would like to invite three members of the panel, the speakers of the three presentations that were made. And we have a live conference, so we can actually see the questions that are being asked. And now we have 20 minutes for the discussion. Feel free to raise any questions or any point you want. So hello once again. And I have a question for the first speaker. You can probably see the question on the screens, but this question is about the change and repairs of the book covers at Vilnius University Library. Are there any specificities in this area?
Taip, Sondra, galit kalbėti.
Yes, please go ahead. Well, the problem is that our research just started. We just started researching our incunabula, and we finished describing in the incunabula that we have in 2019. Well, there are certain features that can be mentioned. For example, Joseph Adler, who dealt with clasps, found that clasps were transferred from one cover to another. And, for example, binding books in white leather was very popular in German-speaking countries, and brown leather with certain stamps were characteristic in the Lithuanian Grand Duchy. In the 19th century, many books were rebound, and for example, judging from the book that belonged to the professor of Marburg University, well, when we look at that book, we can say that it was popular to rebound books using cardboard covers and marble paper. And at the beginning of the 20th century, at Vilnius Magnus University, the books were rebound with paper covers using marble paper, and that was a specific feature of that library, Vilnius Magnus University, Vytautas Magnus University Library. And one more question. Do we know anything about the authors and producers, the authors of covers of those books? Do you have any names? Well, the research has just started. We didn't have enough time, and quarantine got in the way as well. So it's quite difficult to tell you now who was the author. And we know of only one author, Jonas from Grodno. He signed one book, so we can be sure that it was his work, but we have distinguished some features of initials and lombards and the techniques used, and we believe that we'll be able to identify certain persons. For example, researchers have identified certain lombards that are characteristic of Italy, others that are characteristic of Germany. So it is possible to identify that, but more research is needed.
And here is a question for Ina. We take all these questions in the sequence of the presentation. So Ina, you have a very specific question about an engraving. And I believe there is always room for even further research. So, maybe you, Ina, can read the question that is addressed to you yourself. Well, hello again. And the question is, which Vilnius University building at the end of the 18th century was called the St. John's College? And is it depicted in the engraving? Yes, so thank you for this very interesting and unexpected question, and I will try to answer it. During your research, I didn't come across this name of a building. Also, historical research of Vilnius University buildings does not offer any name of the building, any building that is named St. John's College. Well, but one thing I can tell is that all the buildings that are depicted in the engraving have been identified. But having heard your question, I will try to make further research and find out if there was a St. John's College. Well, thank you. And usually, I believe artists never lied in the past, right? Now we can create things out of our head, but in the engraving of that time, every detail was important. Every detail had a reason to be depicted in the engraving. And, well, I liked your presentation because you used one engraving to tell about the history of Vilnius. The engraving depicts even a small botanical garden at its very start, so it was really very interesting. And as I can see, we have one more question for Agne. And you can see the question. It is on your screens. And the question is about silk. We know that silk is a very fragile material, but on the other hand, it is also a very expensive material. Have you come across any evidence? And we know that in the 18th century, some nobility had engravings printed on silk. So, how the silk reached Lithuania? What were the ways for silk to reach Lithuania?
Thank you for the question. Well, first of all, silk reached Lithuania a bit later than elsewhere, but we know that during the first millennium, silk would reach Europe from Arab countries and became popular and became more available in Western Europe. And this was related to the fact that at the beginning of the second millennium, some Italian cities started making silk, and some Italian towns became famous for silk. So silk was quite widespread in Europe, and it was used everywhere where there was a need for luxurious, expensive fabrics. That is in different courts, in monasteries. And sometimes it is difficult to say whether a certain fabric was meant for a book, or maybe that fabric was used for clothing, and once that piece of clothing became worn, that fabric was used to bind a book. But when it comes to the first half of the second millennium, well, the majority of examples are found in churches, and the majority of silk was processed or reused. And noble people were not content to just have silk clothes. Silk had to be decorated additionally. And for example, when gold was used, it was possible to remove gold threads and reuse them. And I did not research the ways how silk reached Lithuania, but I believe that it came to Lithuania together with liturgical religious clothes. It must have come with Catholicism. Well, the oldest books that I found were from the 17th century, and I'm speaking about printed books here. And I'm not sure whether I would find anything if I looked at manuscripts. This requires broader research. When it comes to engravings, well, wood engravings came to Europe from Arab countries. Well, these were engravings on fabric. Later on, wood engravings were placed on paper in Europe, and it was observed that these engravings were of better quality when they were made on paper. And I'm talking about the end of the 14th century. But the technique is quite old. Thank you. I see one more question. Well, the question is whether you can find silk in book bindings. Well, we know that you can find all sorts of things in books, but the author of the question says that, paper tapestry can be found in Lithuania in book bindings, but can you find silk? Well, since I'm only starting researching those books, my first phase of research was to find books with silk, and I believe that identifying the origins of silk would mean a further phase of my research. Well, I spoke about the Orthodox hymn book. It contains a lot of examples of different fabrics. Well, this is related to bookmarks. We know that bookmarks were of different types. Sometimes silk bands were used. So have you come across any particularly decorative bookmark? Well, I think that the most decorative were the pillows used with bookmarks, not the bookmarks themselves. I was really impressed with those pillows. The first ones that I saw at the Lithuanian National Library. I saw more than a dozen, but I believe that there are more that can be found in Lithuania. And they surprised me not only with their beauty and but also I was surprised by their form, that they were square, because you can't find anything like that elsewhere in Europe. There's one more question to you, Agne. Have you been able to identify the origin of the fabric used in the book which belonged to Jablonskis? That is the question from Madam Survidiene. Well, no, I haven't tried to do that. This would relate to my further work, because I don't know at the moment. Well, we're not sure where Mr. Jablonskis bought that book, whether he bought it in Austria or elsewhere. More research is needed to determine that. So if you have any more questions, you are welcome to send them to us. I can only say that after our discussions we'll have a short break, but we'll ask you to connect to us, to join us once again exactly at the time which is indicated in the agenda. I believe that Vilnius University Library, Wróblewski Library, and the Lithuanian National Library have collections that reflect different bibliographical aspects. We know that Vilnius was the capital of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. This was the center of publishing, and all book production revolved around Vilnius, and the rich archives of libraries reflect the activities around this area. So at the end of our first session and at the end of our discussion, I would like to thank our speakers. I would also like to thank you for your questions. Thank you for excellent presentations. And now we will have a short break, short coffee break. And please be back at 12 o'clock. That is the time that is indicated in our agenda. Thank you.
Welcome back, and we continue with the first session of our international conference. Now we shall go back to the 20th century, and we will talk about the art of bookbinding. Here we have Rūta Taukinaitytė Narbutienė as the first speaker, and the topic of her presentation is the bookbinders' shops of Kaunas in the interwar period, processes and influences. Rūta is a member of the Vilnius Bookbinders Guild. She completed a course in fine leather in Kaunas Art College, and she has acquired a master's degree in art history from Vilnius Academy of Arts. She was granted the status of art creator in 2017, and she's interested in the contemporary artistic handmade bookbinding. She participates in conferences, publishes articles, curates exhibitions. She is also the author of the book Bookbinders on Books and Bookbinding, published in Vilnius in 2013. So, Rūta, the floor is yours. Good morning. I will start by inviting every one of you to visit an exhibition about bookbinding at the State Čiurlionis Museum. But now let's go back to the topic about the bookbinding during the period between the two world wars. There is little evidence, or there are little publications on this topic. During the interwar period, the bookbinding services were provided by private firms as well as bigger bookbinding or printing houses. However, the bookbinding services were often linked to the activities of bookstores with the production of leather decorative items and church regalia. In Lithuania, there were over 100 printing houses between the two world wars, and mostly they were small companies, but there were a few larger printing houses which provided a lot of services, including bookbinding. In Gudaitis' book and other sources, we came across evidence that Kaunas bibliophiles usually used the services provided by Spindulys and Spaudos Fondas printing houses. Printing house Spindulys was established in 1928 after merging the State Printing House and Švyturys Book Publishing Company. It had typesetting, linotype machines, offset lithography, zincography, intaglio, rotary, monotype printing divisions, as well as the bookbindery and the mint. In 1929, in the revision protocols, it was noted that bookbinding and paper folding functions have to be expanded because part of this work was had to be outsourced from small binders who used primitive methods and were not at all cheap. And in the inventories of the equipment used in the printing house, we can find paper and cardboard cutting machines, corner cutting machines, saddle stitching, thread stitching machines, book presses, hot gilding machines, rounding machines, folding hole punches and ring setting devices, wooden clamps, glue binding machines, cardboarding machines, stamping, perforation devices, cardboard carving machines, corrugation devices, a board for gluing maps, etc. All of that was used for mass production and for a wide range of services. However, there were some tools, the presence of some tools point to the fact that individual orders or individual individual works of manual bookbinding were performed too. Those include agate stone, cushions for gold cutting, typesetting tweezers, 18 sets of fonts for gilding and embellishment marks, and many more. Apparently, they were also using saw blades to make grooves for hiding knots, which hints that hand or manual sewing techniques were used too. Rounding molds, wooden presses, and other tools also point to the fact that some of the work was done manually. In the archives of Spinduli's printing house, we found some accounting ledgers dating back to 1939-1940, which perhaps were produced by the same printing house, and they had marble edging. The marble patterns were done professionally by using combing technique. One ledger is decorated with nonpareil ornament, and the other with an improvised version of nonpareil. And it seems that the ledgers were produced around the same period, and this is the best evidence that paper modeling was still a popular technique in 1940. However, later this method or this technique vanished. Payroll book suggests that the number of employees was relatively low given the scope of work in the bookbinderies. There were several categories of skilled bookbinders, several apprentices. Then there was a paper cutter and about 30 to 40 folders, ladies. And in the order books, we found that the clients included both private individuals as well as companies, and the orders ranged from a few copies of the books to mass or to and you can order thousands of copies of the book. And the binding could be both simple or artistic. Commercial ads found in the press of the time also point to the fact that artistic binding services were provided by different bookbinders, and they used a lot of quite modern equipment. There was a possibility to select or to choose the paper or binding material, and bookbinderies also provided binding services for periodical publications. Book bindings accounted for about 80% of the scope of work in the bookbinderies. But the printing house, apart from bookbinding, also was making photo albums, folders, address labels, fabric or cardboard-lined maps and plans, and also performed individual binding operations such as only stitching, only coating of sheets, or only imprinting blind or gold or gilded imprints. The prices varied from 0.3 to 3 liters per print. The prices, indeed, depended on the size of the book, or on its complexity, and the methods used. The average price for binding a book was from 2 to 5 liters. If larger format books from 7 to 12 liters, and if you pay about 20 to 30 liters, you could expect to have leather covers for your book. Then photo albums, scrapbooks, address labels, and folders were a little bit more expensive, and their price could reach 250 liters. The most expensive item produced by the printing house was a leather covered folder, which was meant to be presented as a gift to President Smetona on his 60 years anniversary. Its price was over 1,000 liters. Other clients included all sorts of state, commercial, or public organizations and enterprises. Mostly, they would order standard documents, receipts, registration books, ledgers, and so on and so forth. And there were also orders that were placed for more expensive items, such as leather albums or folders. Usually, they would come; such orders would come from the Chamber of Agriculture and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Well, the Railway Fund of Vilnius committee placed an order for gold for the Book of Gold, the cost of which was 163. However, later this book received very negative reviews from Zigmas Malašauskas, who said that the quality of book binding for the gold book was very poor. Well, the number of private clients was larger than the number of public clients. And private clients would ask for more expensive binding services, and they also asked for more expensive and more decorative materials. As to the equipment and devices for bookbinding, the printing house Spindulys used to acquire everything from Lithuania and from foreign countries. They would, when in 1940, when Spindulys also acquired Viltis printing house, they started producing items from leather. And they were using all sorts of leather. They used brown, black, local leather, or tainted leathers from abroad. A similar activity took place in the printing house of Spaudos Fondas. There is a lot of information found in the archives about the requests from the employees to raise or to be admitted to work or to raise their salaries. It is very difficult to tell the exact number, but all these applications show that the printing house employed quite a few employees. And from their applications, we can see that employees came from many different walks of life. Some of them were students working part-time. Another part of employees were simple workers because they were carrying out one function only. Women who were employed in the stitching or folding sections or divisions. And yet another part of employees were the assistant bookbinders, which included people who have acquired quite extensive experience and were capable of performing all functions that relate to bookbinders' activity. So there were nearly equal portion of women and men. And also from the documents we can see that sometimes the bookbinding lessons or training lessons were provided. However, there were only a few high class or very skilled masters who were capable of performing luxury manual gilding and bookbinding. To mention a few, it was Vladas Prasničnas, Aleksas Banevičius, Zigmas Malašauskas, and those high-skilled masters were capable of working with all sorts of materials, including leather, including gilding techniques. They were capable of decorating the paper and edges of the block of the book by using many different techniques. We have some statistical data which was collected by Užtupas during the interwar period. In that statistical data, he counted all sorts of bookbinding machines existing in Lithuania at the time. So, in general, in 1940, about 40 polygraphic companies were located in Kaunas, 80 in Vilnius, and 30 in other cities. And together, they owned 117 paper cutting machines, 76 saddle stitching machines, 24 thread stitching machines, and 20 folding machines. Well, the fact that there were fewer thread stitching machines shows that the saddle stitching was more popular. And it also shows that majority of the books were just simple, thin booklets or brochures. And majority of the books were issued in paperbacks and very few in hard cover. Apart from major printing houses in Kaunas, bookbinding services were offered by individual masters and small companies such as Kadelit, Lade, which would employ several, up to 20 people. And but those private bookbinderies were very small, situated in one room only, and only a few of them had paper cutting machines. All other operations were done manually. They would usually perform simple bindings, but I believe that there is grounds to believe that from time to time they would offer also some decoration services too. And all of this reveals that any bookbindery, irrespective of how many machines they had or had not, were capable of performing and carry out individual as well as mass bindings. The examples that we came across evidence that in the 20th century, beginning of 20th century, the traditional decoration techniques from the 19th century were still very popular and in use. However, the bookbinding business of the time was also significantly influenced by leather workshops. This influence started about 1930s, 1940s. They used the leather workshops used to specialize in processing or in fine processing of leather and manufacture such leather accessories as wallets, handbags, belts, photo albums, block notes, leather boxes, and leather jewelry. The two crafts, bookbinding and fine leather, were particularly partially similar to one another, as they used the same raw material and decoration techniques. There were quite a few manufacturers of these items, of leather items in Kaunas, but the most famous and the most influential of them was Shatria. The secret behind Shatria's success was a leather master from Estonia, who not only introduced novel technological and stylistic methods, but also demonstrated a high level of craftsmanship. His name was Axel Leopold Karing. In 1925, he graduated from Tallinn School of Art and Crafts and he was a pupil of Edward Taska, who got his education in Paris, Munich, and St. Petersburg. He became a founder of the strong Estonian school of painting. Axel Karing graduated from the school in 1925. Then he came to Lithuania in January 1936 and was issued a work permit for 3 months. During those 3 months, he, together with the co-owner Ernestas Kiršas, set up a leather art workshop. Another co-founder of the company was Ludmila Lucia Kirsch. They planned to admit several apprentices who had to work for 6 months without pay and to use Lithuanian folk patterns on their products. On that occasion, the work permit for Karing was extended for further 3 months. In the middle of June, they moved to new premises on Kęstučio Street 18, and they had set up a workshop in the 3-room apartment. In August, Amatininkas magazine printed an article about fine art leather items produced by the company, and the article also purported that there is a shortage of specialists in fine leather processing. Also, the article said that the Estonian master offered to make several leather items for Marginiai company and using a new chemical leather polychromy method. And Marginiai was another company established in 1930, and they actually acted as a mediator between the crafts and folk artists and helped them to sell their products. So Marginiai placed an order for Karing, and Karing produced the items to the specifications of the company. In autumn, Karing got another extension of his work permit in order to continue working not only as an entrepreneur but also as a trainer for fine leather apprentices. And the success of Karing's company was evidenced by the turnover statistics. For some unknown reason, at the end of the same year, the Karing's Shatria company was bought by Vanda Khodakauskienė. But Karing nevertheless stayed with the company and was running the operations. At that time, they already had 10 apprentices, and they were selling their products to Spaudos Fondas and other companies. The ambitions of the company are evidenced by the exhibition of Shatria products in 1937, which received positive reviews in the press and among the population. And the activity of the company was increasing, the company was expanding, and it is evidenced by the taxes, by the increased taxes that were paid for the year 1937. It seems that Karing was popularizing not only novel leather printing techniques and polychromy, but also other more traditional decoration methods such as manual engraving, cuir, sisal, and inlaying. Those two techniques in Lithuania were not used or not widely used, and Karing used those techniques to decorate the items produced by Kshatriya. To decorate these items, he would use Lithuanian folk ornaments and Kaunas cityscape. However, in 1938, due to the expired working permits and the rising war tensions in Europe, he goes back to Estonia. Well, however, he left a legacy in Lithuania. There were a few Lithuanian masters who followed in the footsteps of Karing, and to mention a few, it was Valerianas Vaičius, who continued in the footsteps of Karing. The role or the impact of Karing was that he introduced new technologies and types of products. He raised artistic and technical standards of the trade, and he also, over a short period of time, he brought artistic leather products to the new level of popularity. The items produced in the center primes were well received by the markets and numerous exhibitions. He set example that was followed by other masters of the trade. And there's no doubt that popularity of these leather products was instrumental to the doubling of leather processing trade students at Kaunas School of Crafts in 1939. Therefore, there is a clear evidence that the influence of Estonian School of Lithuanian artistic bookbinding started during the interwar period, not in the Soviet era, as was common belief. Thank you, Ruta, for your presentation. It is interesting to note that the Estonian School of Bookbinding is still at the forefront of the trade. It still has a huge influence. It still has a huge influence on the Lithuanian bookbinding trade. It's very interesting to see how one person, one individual, can change the history or the evolution of the trade in another country. Now, I would like to invite Danutė Zovienė, and the topic of her presentation is Eugenijus Karpavičius, a book aristocrat. Danutė Zovienė is an art critic, holds a PhD in art history. She is the member of ICA. She cooperates with printing houses, and she is ahead of many printing projects. She has compiled a number of books on the biographies and work of artists, developed a cycle of talks about the National Gallery of Fine Arts, and she also participated in the Lithuanian television program Proskinos. She arranged a series of exhibitions known unknown Lithuanian art of the last decade of the 20th century, and she curated a number of the artist's solo exhibitions. Her presentation is about Eugenijus Karpavičius, who was the person who influenced the tradition of book art in Lithuania.
Hello. The topic of the conference is an excellent opportunity for us to remember one of the most famous book artists of Lithuania of the 20th, 21st century, Mr. Eugenijus Karpavičius. Over the period of 30 years, while working in the area of book art, he created book designs for more than 300 publications of different genres, books, art and photo albums, catalogs, poetry books, essay books, etc. And he received many awards in Lithuanian and international book art competitions. So how do we appreciate the works of Eugenijus Karpavičius and his contribution to the development of Lithuanian book art? Are the principles of book art design created by him still relevant? The main principle of the works of Eugenijus Karpavičius is less is more. It essentially reflects the essence of the book, that is as one of the oldest means of communication, and it also reflects the main functions of a book: information, cognitive, and aesthetic. Karpavičius was well aware of these functions and embodied them in the body of a book. He used strong architectonics, a logical structure, clear composition, a harmony of text and image, and he was well aware of printing opportunities. The creative path of Eugenijus Karpavičius until 2001, when he established his own printing house, was a long and a hard one. He started his path from design studies at the State Art Institute, which is now the Vilnius Academy of Art, and he graduated that institute in 1978. And the early work of Karpavičius was related to graphic design and with theater posters. At that period, in the context of highly politicized Lithuanian posters, his works stood out. They were based on the composition principles of still lifes, and the artist used some new methods. For example, he combined fonts with photography, and he later used that principle in book art. It is worth remembering that at the end of 1970s, Lithuanian book art was mainly influenced by figurative art, especially printing, and the artistic value of a book was identified with illustration art. Artists usually created only the cover and the illustrations of the book that were simply combined with printed text using linotype. And the quality of printing was rather poor at that time. A major influence to modern Lithuanian book art was made in 1978 when the Art Exhibition Center held the first Lithuanian illustration, printing, and book art exhibition, which covered the period between 1940 and 1978. Another important stimulus was that professional graphic artists started working at publishing houses as art editors. And there was an especially creative team of artists at the publishing house Mokslas. That group was active in 1982-1992, and Karpavičius, while working at that publishing house, which had a large collection of book art examples, had an opportunity to get to know the theory of book art and the works of classic artists. And a very important moment in Karpavičius' work was marked by the start of cooperation with the Open Society Lithuania. When Lithuania's independence was restored in 1990, of Western information resources became accessible to Lithuanian book creators, and the Open Society Fund Lithuania gave an opportunity to publishers and book artists to attend book fairs in Western Europe, where they could see the production of the most famous world publishing houses, and to compare Lithuanian books and see what they looked like in the exhibition space. The new approach to book design became clear in 1993 when Karpavičius created the design for the selected essays of Albert Camus, and this was one of his first book designs, which received awards in Lithuania. And since the artist was basing his work on the classical 20th century principles of typography, he later used those principles in a creative way in his later works, and it is especially clear in his book Vilnius Universiteto Bibliotekos Aldai, which was published in his publishing house. I would like to remind you that typography as a consistent system of art was formed in 1920s, 1930s, and the theoretical principles of typography were laid down then. The books, the value of a book was mainly created with the help of a white sheet of paper and the harmony of white and black without any decorations. And Karpavičius found these principles close to his heart. He was especially appreciative of minimalism. He deliberately avoided excessive decoration. But his books are not soulless. It is obvious that it has an emotive connection with the text and the image. And every book design that he created has a clear scenario, the prologue, development, and epilogue. For example, the book published in 1996 by Baltos Lankos Publishing House, this was the book, a poetry book by Vytautas Bložė. It is of a convenient format and has modest design. Over a decade, while working for the Baltos Lankos Publishing House, Karpavičius created book designs for many publications that received awards. In scientific books, the artist also followed the classical book design principles. He chose a convenient format, clear architectonics that was in line with the purpose and the addressee of the book, and easy-to-read font, a rational length of a line, and elegant illustrations, and conveniently laid out scientific annexes. The respect that the artist had for a book is especially evident in fundamental publications devoted to the Lithuanian cultural heritage. For example, in the book The Lithuanian Church Art, published in 1993, and in the book Lithuania, Past Culture and the Present, published in 1999. And special attention should be paid to the tourist guide Baroque in Lithuania, which was also published by Baltos Lankos. It was the first tourist guide published in independent Lithuania, and it received an award in the Baltic Book Competition. And this book gave the tone for later similar books. For example, a book by Tomas Venclova, Vilnius, A Guide to the City, and Jankevičiūtė, Guide, Lithuania. In these publications, the artist clearly follows the principles that were formulated by Jan Čichold in the 20th century. According to Čichold, book creation is a science rather than art, and the main precondition is a well-mastered craft. But this is not it. This is not all. What is necessary is also the innate taste and tact of a creator. And the book with the good design makes the artist as if invisible. And such approach by Čichold was very close to Karpavičius' heart. The maturity and distinctive style of Karpavičius is clearly reflected in art publications and architectural photography albums. And it was in this area that he left his most significant heritage in Lithuanian book art. In the group of art publications, artist monographies dominate, and Karpavičius always tried to reflect the distinctive features of artists. And for example, in the book Feliksas Jakubauskas, Karpavičius pays a lot of attention to the details of textile works. He tries to depict the texture of fabric, and in the book Antanas Mončys, he pays a lot of attention to the uniqueness of the sculpture's work, the silhouettes, lighting, and details. This is the book about Petras Rapšys, published in 2016. This is one of the largest and works by Karpavičius. He worked on that book for 8 years, and the book is really large, 360 pages, and it is close to the so-called coffee table books. However, this book preserves an intimate relation with the artist's works, and the book design, which is based on harmonious combination of the text and illustrations, is very evident here. Karpavičius was able to use the white sheets of paper in a very creative and craftful way. In the book's architectonics, we can see rhythmic pauses and space, and Karpavičius usually avoids superfluous elements. Karpavičius was especially interested in old Lithuanian photography and its heritage, and this was no accident. The grandfather of Karpavičius, Povilas Karpavičius, was considered to be the champion of applied photography in Lithuania. He also promoted photo art and photo techniques, and he was one of the brightest representatives of color photography after the war. In modern book publishing, photo albums, photo publications in terms of design are the closest to art publications, and their basis is visual material. Karpavičius was well aware of the specificity of photography and was able to depict that specificity in the book. And photo albums, photo publications designed by him have clear architectonics and reflect elegance and the totality of elements. If we compare the albums devoted to famous photographers, for example, Balys Buračas and Stanislavas Filiberas Fleury, you can see how the work of Karpavičius became more free. In the monography of Buračas, the visual side is rather reserved and even dry. And a decade later, in the album devoted to Philibert Fleury, we can see that Karpavičius has mastered his craft. He uses different sizes of photographs, but he is never too far away from his main principle of work, that the starting point is the work of art. His very personal relationship with photography is reflected in the catalogue of the Lithuanian National Museum, which was published in the year 2000. This book emphasizes the state of concentration and attention which is usually prevalent in museums or when a person is leafing through an old family album. And the only decorative element is the cut corners of photographs that were characteristic of family photo albums of that time. And the same principle was used Karpavičius used in the old photography catalogue, Vilnius Photography 1858-1915. With time, Karpavičius started focusing on architectural photography publications, and these books brought the main principles of his work to the fore, and the main principle is less is more. And he was able to implement this principle without any limitations in his own publishing house, which he established in the year 2001. The first book of this publishing house was Jan Bulhak, Vilnius Baroque. It was published in 2003, and that book received an award of the Ministry of Culture. And one of the critics, when presenting this publication, said that the book design ideally corresponds to the content of the book. And the same can be said about other publications of Karpavičius Publishing House. The majority of them were architectural photography books, and they embodied the main features of the artist's style, that is, focus and the careful reflection of the content of the book, architectonics and structure, and functionality of typography elements. Well, it's been a decade since the passing of Mr. Karpavičius, and I can repeat my question. Are the principles of book design created by him still relevant? Well, if we remember his credo, that less is more, I believe that his principles are still relevant. If we look at the bookshelves in Lithuanian bookshops, we can see that one of the problems is not the lack of creativity, but the surplus of decorative elements and a large number of typographic elements, and reserved and functional book design is not appreciated enough. On the other hand, we have a new generation of book designers. This generation is coming with its own original approach and a bold modern design. There is a dialogue between classical and an innovative book, and the boundaries of understanding book art are expanding, and the boundaries between traditional book genres and categories are disappearing. There are elements and signs of experimentation in almost every book category. Book designers are experimenting with book formats, composition solutions, font sizes, colors, etc. All this changes not only the body of the book, but the approach towards the book. And there is another side of the same coin. Innovations often prevail, and the main book function is forgotten. Therefore, I think that the principle of Karpavičius, less is more, remains relevant. Thank you to this interesting presentation. We were able to see the totality of the artist's work, and when we see that totality, we can reflect on it in a different way. I don't think that Karpavičius' work is appreciated enough, and I'm very happy to say that this text is going to be published and more people will have an opportunity to get to know Karpavičius' work. And now we'll hear our last speaker in this part of the conference, Rasa Janulevičiūtė. She will be speaking about the layers of the artist's books designed by Kęstutis Vasiliūnas. Rasa Janulevičiūtė is an artist and an art critic. She is the member of the Lithuanian Artists Union. She has published numerous articles, 2 monographies. For example, one of them is the design department of Vilnius Academy of Arts, 1961-1990, the foundation of professional Lithuanian design. That monography was published in 2011, and then another publication, 10 Chairs, Narratives in Lithuanian Design, which was published in 2018. She takes part in group exhibitions and also arranges personal exhibitions. Her field of study includes design and artists' books. Her artistic interests cover calligraphy, ex libris, graphics, and artists' books. So I will now give the floor to Rasa.
Good morning. I'm going to talk about the layers of artist books created by Kęstutis Vasiliūnas and Roberta Vaigeltaitė. Joanna Drucker considers the artist books to be the most essential form of art of the 20th century. But despite numerous aesthetic, conceptual, and semantic discoveries, the creators of artists' books keep searching for the new forms of expression. Peculiarities of the artist's book, spatial, sensory, emotional, subconscious, and rational perception, enable this area to stay in a constant change and transformation by responding to the new developments in the artist himself and in the era he or she lives. It encompasses all sorts of possibilities to open up cultural, social, personal, daily, and unique experience. In Lithuania, the contemporary artist books creation period started after Lithuania has regained its independence. And Lithuania set itself free from the Soviet regulations and merged with the Western modern contemporary art principles. 1993 saw the first international artist books exhibition held in Vilnius, and Vasiliūnas the same year started curating triennials of the artist books in 1997. In 2018, the 8th triennial Memento Mori took place in Lithuania, after which the books and exhibits were selected by the jury and shown in Vilnius, later on exhibited in the US, Italy, and Germany. The geography of the artist books exhibitions is very broad, and since 1993, 40 international artist books exhibitions and symposiums were organized in Lithuania and abroad, including Germany, America, Austria, France, South Korea, and elsewhere. All the artist books triennials organized in Lithuania show that Vasiliūnas activity is a very important phenomenon, not only for Lithuania, but to other countries as well. And in this context, we have to talk not only about the creation of artist books, but also about the artist books movement initiated by Vasiliūnas in Lithuania. In my presentation, I'm going to analyze artist books created by Vasiliūnas and Vageltaitė. And by doing so, I will try to reveal the specificities of the interaction between the artist and the polygraphic book. Roberta Vageltaitė got involved in the artist books movement at the beginning of the 90s. Of the last century. She participated in the exhibition of the first artist book exhibition held in the gallery Arka, and she exhibited her book Everything About Water, or From the Life of Fairies. Over the period of 30 years, she created 60 unique artist books. Most of them were published in one copy only. Vageltaitė created artist books for thematic exhibitions. Vasiliūnas, she participated in artist books triennials organized by Vasiliūnas, as well as other thematic exhibitions. For the 8th International Textile Miniature Biennial, in 2013, she created a book, Thoughts and Deaths. For the 10th biennial Ethno, she created a book, History Without History, and Correction of Errors. Majority of Vageltaitės artist books have a traditional form of a book. And there are different, she can use harmonica folded books, such as the book with the title Moonlight. She uses other forms as well. Apart from different forms, she also using different techniques, engraving, wood carving, etching of art, holography, collage, embroidery, tins, threads, and all sorts of other material. By using all these materials, the artist relates herself to the creation, to the creative world, rather than to the environmentalistic movement. She uses visual information fragments for her books that include old documents and seals or stamps, medical blanks or recipes, advertising brochures, magazines, and so on and so forth. Lately, Vageltaitė started using new materials and their combinations, like fused glass, rusted tin covers, and other. All these materials allow Vageltaitė to observe and record, as she says, how people are telling their stories about their activities, feelings, and conditions through the footprints they make. Abstract forms of things become multifaceted and interesting, while the signs and connections from the surrounding environment turn into markers and references that change the meaning and significance of things. Polygraphic mass production and Vageltaitės books, mass-produced and Vageltaitės books have one common feature, which is a text. And Kristina Kleponytė Šemeškienė observed that while constructing the object, Vageltaitė sticks to the primary purpose of a book, that is to disseminate the printed work. The artist is interested in typography and various modes of its usage. The appearance of text in her works may not necessarily carry a direct and concrete message. More often than not, they are anagrams, sporadic games with typographic figures, or just various random thoughts. Artistic transformation of text into visual artistic structures, nevertheless, Well, there is a transformation of text into artistic structures, yet the purpose of the text retains its meaning in Vageltaitės works. She uses text in many different forms. For example, in one book, she writes a phrase word by word on single pages that can be seen when you open the book as a fan. And in the book Towers of Journey, created in 2011, the theme of road signs migrates into wood carving prints named "No Stalks, No Children." There are no pandas in Lithuania. There are no giant mosquitoes in China or Lithuania. For the last eighth artist book, Triennial Memento Mori, Vageltaitė offers a book, I'm Dying to Live. And for that book, Vageltaitė chose the structure of the code, although somewhat reduced and stiff. This book is an object in the shape and an old open book. Is an object in the shape of an old open book. One part of it is wrapped into black mourning fabric, the other is covered with a glass shawl. Vageltaitė got this idea from the 1976 novel by Danilo Kish called A Tomb for Boris Davidovich. She says that the main character is tortured in prisoner camps, and the only thing that he's striving for is to die. Yet the fate had other arrangements, and it seems the quotation I use on my book, object, and the name I give to my book represent a paradoxical parallel between the theme of life and death. Pilgrims of Shilov, created in 2009. For this book, she used the techniques of collage, footprints, manuscript, and the printed text. The book consists of loose flaps of the book made of the old book covers. It seems the pink book cover covers is enveloped in the scraps of posters and looks as if they are wrapped in shawls. And the pages contain historical facts about Šilova, a pilgrimage place in Lithuania. Kęstutis Vasiliūnas is a universal artist. He is a graphical artist. He is the creator of artist books and installations. He is also curator of exhibitions. According to Vaidilutė Brazauskaitė, Vasiliūnas rejects ethical and aesthetical compromises, blindness. The artist is openly against aggressive and well-hidden commercialization, institutionalization, and uniformity of art. He rejects all attempts to please any fashion, intellectual or political manifestations of art. Vasiliūnas got involved in artistic book, got interested in artist books in the 90s of the last century. His first artist book is called The Book of Creation, was exhibited in 1993 at the exhibition which is called Book. The artist creates unique or low circulation artist books, and he uses a number of techniques such as wood carving, manual print, drawing, printed text, or embossed print. He tries to retain visual connection with the traditional structure of the code. It doesn't matter the material he uses, as he always tries to keep the form horizontal or square. Exceptional feature of Vasiliūnas artist books is the use of tea bags. And to mention one is the tea bag number 8, Sonata per Gaza, created in 2017. And the texture of staple tea bags raises associations, first and foremost semantic associations, and he uses tea bags to write the text. The materiality of tea bags has been noticed by Jurgita Sprindžiūnaitė when she was describing the works exhibited in the artist's book's triennial Klaida, or the error. She uses such epithets as the coziness of material and fragile texture, never-ending shades of sensitivity, meditational mood. The impression of a peaceful pause of the tea bag books is further reinforced by a poetic text in the tea bag book number 9, where he uses poetical text. I drink tea and I can hear raindrops falling and I can see a full moon rising. Vasiliūnas also carried out an international project at the triennial, which is called Apocalypse in 2000. And the project is called Project in the Project number 1. Vasiliūnas offered to the participants of this triennial loose polygraphic sheets printed in offset with apocalyptic text from the New Testament. And he tasked the artist to make their own interpretation of the text and to illustrate the text. And and then the results, the works created by the participants were exhibited in the gallery Kairė Dešinė. Quite another interaction between the artist and typographic book can be found in the catalogs for the triennials of the artist's books that are created by Vasiliūnas. He uses printed sheets of the catalogs which are torn and then bound manually. He uses different fonts, signs, and the catalogs are really very aesthetic and subtle works of art. In 2011, Vasiliūnas created an artist's book which is called Incurable Love for Traveling, 26 gasoline stations. This idea was based on the work by Ed Ruscha, which is also called 26 Gasoline Stations. Only he created his work in 1963. Ed Ruscha is considered to be the founding father of conceptual artist book. And his 26 Gasoline Stations became the first conceptual artist book. Joanna Drucker says that it became a cliché of the artist's books. She says that the field of the artist's books is formulated by many spontaneous expressions of originality and origin. This is a field which is under the pressure, which is constantly elaborated and researched by artists from many fields of work. Ed Ruscha's book, 26 Gasoline Stations, had many followers, and Vasiliūnas was among them. The idea to have a similar book came to Vasilunas while he was in Italy. He spent 4 weeks in an art residence in Venice, at the International Venice School of Graphics, Scuola Internazionale di Grafica Venezia. Then after the 4 weeks, he was set to go back to Lithuania, and then he had this idea of copying this marvelous idea of 26 gasoline stations. The two works by Ed Ruscha and Vasilunas are similar or are connected by one fact. That is that they have photographed or depicted 26 gasoline stations. Only Ed Ruscha did that on the way from Los Angeles to Oklahoma while traveling on this legendary Route 66. So he, while traveling, he took very blunt or banal pictures of gasoline stations in California, Arizona, Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Meanwhile, Vasilunas was traveling by his car from Venice to Vilnius through Austria, Czech Republic, and Poland. And according to the author, he was traveling, on the first day he was traveling 15 hours and covered the distance of 1,068 kilometers. The remaining 741 kilometers was traveled during the second day. And on his way, Vasilunas also photographed 26 gasoline stations by indicating also the location and time of the photograph. Conceptually, Ed Ruscha created a polygraphic book which was supposed to become just a part of regular just another commercial books. It had to be cheap, but mass-produced without any ambitions to an exceptional status of artist books. Ed Ruscha even didn't even number the copies of his books, as it is typical to the artist books. Vasilunas, meanwhile, printed only 12 copies of the book, and he used and for printing he used foil and ink printer. The artist in some way rejects the idea of Ed Ruscha of making the book a mass-produced product. He wanted to create a unique product, and that opposes the idea of Ed Ruscha. Researchers agree that in the 80s there were two directions for creation of artist books: the conceptual one, like Ed Ruscha's, and artist books like Objects, which is related to Dieter Roth works. In the first direction stresses ideas and the importance of the concept, while the other gives freedom to experiment with the body of the book. And this is how they are trying to divide the mass-produced, mass-produced product from the unique existential product. Vasiliūnas says that artist books are not diaries or children books or illustrated books or collections or compilations of fine art or graphic works. If the author thought about the concept while creating the book, it becomes an artist's book. It is worth mentioning that Ed Ruscha has certain religious associations. 26 gasoline stations are compared to the stations of the cross, and the same ideas or some tints of this idea can also be seen in Vasiliūnas' book. The topic of religion is also important for Vasiliūnas, and it is also witnessed that many of the triennials organized by Vasiliūnas or curated by Vasiliūnas are related in some ways to religion. For example, Diary, 8 Days, 23 Sins, Apocalypse, Memento Mori, and other. All books of Vasiliūnas and Vaigeltaitės artist books are conceptual. They reflect the worldview of the artist. They reflect the theme topics of one man and the world. They reveal their searching for artistic expression becomes a basis for typographic experiments, migrate into graphic design, and intertwine with other areas of art creation. Thank you. Thank you, Rasa, for a very interesting presentation. And now we shall have discussions. I can see quite a few questions which are addressed to Rūta Taukinaitytė. However, unfortunately, Rūta cannot be present at this panel discussion. So I believe that we shall have to wait for Rūta's answers to some of these questions. And I can see that her presentation basically raised a lot of questions. But may I invite Rasa and Danutė to this discussion panel, and let us start.
Matau Danutę.
So I can see both Rasa and Danutė very well. Danutė, I can see that there was a question to you immediately, and I would like to remind all the listeners that you can still post your questions. You can now see the speakers on your screens, and you are free to ask questions. So a question to Danutė. So the style of book design by Karpavičius, does Karpavičius have any followers? And the things that are happening in the modern world of book design, is Karpavičius still relevant? So first of all, thank you for your question. Secondly, I would like to apologize to the listeners. Well, Karpavičius did not create book designs for 30 books. No, he created book designs for more than 300 publications. So when it comes to the question that was asked, well, we probably can't speak about followers of Karpavičius. We can probably speak about the principle itself. So it is a reserved principle of book design based on classical typography. So I can mention Bronius Leonavičius here. He doesn't create book designs himself, but he is a follower of Chichold. I could also mention Vida Kuraitė, who is also a follower of traditions. She was a colleague of Karpavičius, then Aida Lavičiūtė, and Jokūbas Jacovskis. They are well aware and they have mastered the principles of classical typography. But on the other hand, we can distinguish several groups of artists. For example, book artists who design books but don't create illustrations, and those who do create illustrations. So here we have Sigita Klebinskaitė. She is well aware of the body of the book and knows the rules of creating book designs. But as I mentioned in my conclusions, well, books cannot escape fashions and the changing attitudes. So there were some fashions in the book world. We had certain manifestations of postmodernism and other trends. So in the contemporary book design, as is demonstrated by book competitions, experimentation prevails, and we can no longer distinguish where we talk about literature or art albums. Well, everybody tries to experiment. Well, this does not necessarily mean novelties, but just different forms and different methods. But fashions come and go, and well, if you want to break rules, you should first know the rules very well. Because if you break the rules without knowing them, you destroy the body of a book. Because, as I mentioned at the beginning, the book has three functions. It is an information carrier, it also has a cognitive function and an aesthetic function. So if aesthetics prevails over other functions, it becomes difficult to understand and to see the soul of the book. And for example, this year we had the competition of the most beautiful book. So the book that won was an experimental one. A lot of handwork was used. The book can be unfolded, etc. And there are also a lot of experiments with the text and typographical elements, and very often the text becomes ineligible. So I believe that the principles of Karpavičius' work are still relevant. But and I believe that these principles will remain after fashions come and go, because certain main elements haven't changed. The book has to be bound properly, and there should be ergonomic calculations about the length of the line, and these are the rules that have been formed in classical typography, and they should not be changed. And Karpavičius always said to me that the book is not the space where the artist can observe no limits, for example, as in painting. Well, the basis should be the content of the book. The book should not become a space where the artist can demonstrate his methods and intricacies. The book should be easy to read. Thank you, Danute. I believe that after the restoration of Lithuania's independence over these several last decades, when we underwent changes, Karpavičius played a very important role. He created the principles of a modern, contemporary book. Yes, and I believe that different institutions, for example, the Lithuanian National Museum, is still following the same principles of book publishing, and those were the principles that were formulated by Karpavičius. Yes, they do follow those principles. Jokūbas Jacovskis also follows the same principles, and Čiurlionis Museum in Kaunas does the same, and these books are very well appreciated. Yes, I made a mistake with one name. It should have been Milda Kairienė. So it is very important for book designers to understand the material and the content of the book. I would also mention Izaokas Ibutsek, who also formulated certain principles of classical books, and the publishing houses that publish tourist guides, for example, about Vilnius or Lithuania, they keep to the same structure, and they have a very clear information layout.
Jos pranešimas kaip
Thank you, Danuta. Now the question goes to Rasa. Her presentation, as you may have noticed, is in clear opposition to the classical or classical book. So here comes the question. Do decisions of the artist's book have any influence on the printing of mass-produced books? Do other artists, illustrators, use those artist books as a source of inspiration for their work? Well, the experiment of the artist books definitely has influence on the printed books. Well, it is enough only to have a look at the winning book of the competition for the most beautiful book, and you will see that a lot of interesting practical design solutions that are worth noticing. And it seems to me that artists are looking for some more creative ways of expression, or more creative ways of expressing their ideas. Well, okay, I can admit that to a certain extent it is also a fashion, but on the other hand, it is part of the artist's book history. So it was a simple question, and I hope I provided a simple answer. Yes, I believe that it is a source of inspiration for artists. And I can give you an example. Agnė Dautartaitė's artist books, which are very beautiful, and perhaps we should ask her to what extent she was influenced by the artist's books. But I see that some influences, nevertheless. Right. What's about acquisition of artist books? Are there any collectors of artist books in our country, or they are just unique? Are they unique books or made in one copy only, or maybe artists are making duplicates of their artist books, where they are stored in the workshops of artists, or perhaps there are some collectors of the artist books? Well, if I had to provide a thorough answer, I wouldn't be able to do so at the moment. I know that Vasiliauskas is taking those books to different international exhibitions, and he also expressed an idea of creating a museum of artist books. And there is one collector, Kazys Varnelis, who started a collection of artist books, and he one can find some artist books created by Lithuanian artists in his library. Well, on the other hand, artist books are unique. But in foreign countries, there are books that are printed in printing houses and sold via bookstores. So there are different experiences. Right. Vasiliūnas is curating biennials and triennials of artist books. And he's been doing that for over 20 years. To what extent this phenomena is significant to our country, and to what extent foreign artists are attracted to participate in those events? Yeah, well, Vasiliūnas has presented statistical information about that in his website. And the statistics show that the interest in triennials and biennials organized in Lithuania is high, is big. And Vasiliūnas gets quite a few books for review, and he makes a selection. There is an international jury that selects those books to be exhibited in the triennials in Vilnius. When he brings collections to other countries, when he takes collections to other countries, I believe that he can also include some unique artist books who are not exhibited in this international triennial exhibition here in Lithuania. Right. Thank you very much. I'm trying to spot any other questions for Rasa or Danuta, but majority of your comments are thanks for your interesting presentations and illustrations of your presentations. But I don't see any more questions, and therefore I would like to thank all of the participants for their interest. And now we will break for lunch. We will resume the second session, which will be held in English after lunch. Please, I encourage every one of you to be active with your questions. We shall try to make a catalog of those questions, and we'll try to answer them. And one more question that is very popular among you regarding the conference material and availability of the conference material. We will upload all the presentations on our website, and you can also find them on the website of our institute. You can also download the video of this conference. So thank you all for your participation. Please come back after lunch. The second session will be as interesting, and we will look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you.